Good morning and welcome to the PT on Ice Daily Show. My name is Kelly Benfey. I'll be joining you this morning for Fitness Athlete Friday, best day of the week. So our topic for today is going to be my top 5 favorite shoulder stability exercises when working with fitness athletes. So excited to talk to you about that. But before we get into our topic for the day, let me just catch you up on what's happening in our fitness athlete division. So our last live course for this calendar year is going to be December 3rd and 4th. Mitch and Guillermo are headed down to Santa Barbara, California for the last time you can catch us on the road. After the rest of this year, going into 2023, we have a ton already booked on the calendar. So I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, we'll be in Florida, we're going to be in Boston, we're going to be in Washington again. So we're going to be in all corners of the states. So be sure to head over to ptonice.com, take a look at our full calendar, start planning where you're going to get your Con Ed for this coming year. If it's live with us, we look forward to seeing you. And then as far as our online courses go, we're kicking off our Essential Foundations course within our fitness athlete division. Our first meeting is starting on Monday. So if you're in that cohort, we look forward to meeting you all. I'm excited to get rolling for another great 8 weeks. So the next time you can hop into that class, as well as our advanced concepts online class, is not going to be until March of next year. So we have a little bit of a break. So if you missed this last cohort, be sure to just snag your spot now. So go ahead, head over, get registered on the course website, ptonice.com. I am particularly excited for the next course that I'm hosting here at Onward Milwaukee. We're going to be hosting Paul and the dry needling team for lower extremity dry needling December 3rd and 4th. So it's already a pretty packed course. I think there are a few spots left. So if you're going to be in the area, if you want to hop in, snag your spot now. But I can't wait to learn from Paul and his team for dry needling all things lower extremity. So be tuned for that. We'll be posting a ton from our experience that weekend. All right. So let's get into our topic for the day. So top 5 shoulder stability exercises. So if you work with a fitness athlete population, you probably see what we see in the research as far as injury incidents. Shoulder issues are the most common pain complaints people are presenting with when doing CrossFit. So when injuries do happen, it's shoulder, then low back, then knee and elbow, and so on. So in my clinical practice with working with mainly fitness athletes, that's exactly what I'm seeing as well. It's if you've been following along with my CrossFitting experience, it's the issue that I typically will have. They're feeling great right now. Thank you for asking. But I've been doing a ton of rehab to keep my shoulders happy and healthy. So I put together my top 5 list of exercises that I personally use, as well as I dose out to a lot of my clients. So I'm happy to talk through that. It makes sense that we see a lot of shoulder issues just because if you think of the exercises that we're commonly seeing in class workouts and CrossFit style training, any barbell overhead movements, shoulder overhead, split jerks, overhead squats, snatches, that's very demanding on the shoulders. Gymnastics like handstand push-up, handstand walking, all of our gymnastics on the rig, toes to bar, pull-ups, muscle-ups, ring muscle-ups. Those are all very demanding of a lot of shoulder range of motion, a lot of strength, and we need enough tissue strength to tolerate all these movements, as well as enough time to recover. So it's easy to allow that to build up and not have enough recovery, and we can see issues rise from that as well. So it makes sense that that's one of the areas that we need as physical therapists to be very prepared in dealing with. So let's go through the top 5 that I compiled. They're not necessarily in order of like I start at number 1, I progressed to number 2. They're not necessarily in any specific order. It's going to be up to you as the healthcare provider to be able to dial in on what's the irritability of your client, where are they at in their rehab process to dose these out appropriately. So let's have a conversation about them. So number 1 is going to be posterior cuff strengthening. So that's always has a strong role in our rehab of strengthening the rotator cuff specifically. And often where I do initially start with a lot of people because it's less irritable for things, for a lot of shoulders. And what I commonly will find myself going to is some posterior cuff strengthening into a lengthened position. So the exercise that I was thinking of is a 90-90 external rotation with the elbow propped on a knee and slowly lowering into an lengthened position for that external rotator. So if you're listening on the podcast, I'm trying to describe these movements as best as possible, but feel free to head over to Instagram or YouTube to get a better picture of me kind of demoing a little bit. So first one, knee or elbow on the knee, lowering into that lengthened position. A common presentation is those tissues need to be strengthened as well as lengthened. And so we get 2-for-1 with that one, where we're getting strength out of the posterior cuff as well as getting some lengthening in those tissues, which is really helpful for shoulder health, shoulder range of motion, etc. So posterior cuff strengthening is my number one. That can be internal and external rotators, but my go-to exercise is 90-90 external rotation. So number 2 is kettlebell stability work. So this often comes, my first thought is the form of a Turkish get-up. So one kettlebell, single arm, we're stabilizing a heavy weight in all planes for that shoulder. I don't initially dish out Turkish get-ups in my plan of care, but what I do is take portions of that Turkish get-up, and that provides a nice stimulus for a lot of athletes. So you can start with just the initial portion of the Turkish get-up. Think of laying on your back, stabilizing the kettlebell in 90 degrees of flexion and rolling to a side lying position. So now we're on abduction at 90 degrees, back and forth, like a kettlebell arm bar. That's a really nice place to start, especially if our athletes are not tolerating overhead loading yet. So you can start to work that rotator cuff in a stability, for stability in positions that are not irritable at that time. So that's a wonderful place to start. You can progress up onto that second position of your Turkish get-up. So you're on the elbow and that shoulder is in a abducted position. That wide angle is similar to our overhead squat or snatch grip position, right? So then you can start maybe doing some external, internal rotation with that kettlebell in that position, which is nice to stabilize specific to our wider grip barbell movements. Then you can progress to maybe that middle portion of the Turkish get-up. So a windmill. So in a half kneeling position, you're starting with the kettlebell overhead and then reaching down to the floor. So we're going from that overhead position to a flexion abducted, externally rotated position. That's a nice way to load the shoulder joint as well when focusing on just stabilizing a weight overhead or out to the side, wherever it may be. It's common in CrossFit that we're doing a lot of things for time, right? So when we're going from shoulder to overhead, we're punching the bar to the ceiling, bringing it right back down. We're never in those end range positions for a really long time. Or if we do find that we are in an end range position for a long time, think of like a single arm overhead walking lunge with a dumbbell overhead. That often crushes athletes. So in my rehab, I love to have athletes hold weight overhead or hold positions that's really challenging for a sustained amount of time, just because in our metabolic conditioning, it's rarer that you're going to have to stabilize for a sustained amount of time. So it's wonderful to include in your rehab. So number 2 is kettlebell stability work, some form of a Turkish get-up. Maybe end stage, you are performing that whole Turkish get-up, which is a really long time under tension for all the muscles around that joint to stabilize that head of the humerus right on the glenoid in very different planes. So that's a wonderful exercise to be dishing out at certain points. All right, so number 3 is anything with a bamboo bar. So if you know me, you know that's probably one of my favorite things to do myself as well as utilize in my plan of care with my clients. So a bamboo bar or an earthquake bar, it's a lightweight bar that looks like a barbell. I think it only weighs about 3 ounces or so. So it's not heavy like your regular barbell, and you hang weights off the end using bands. So you can hang kettlebells, you can hang little plates off the end. So that hanging band technique makes it very challenging for your shoulders to stabilize an unstable weight. You could see how that would be a fun challenge for athletes. So I will use this in many different ways. If again, early on, if they're irritable in an overhead position, you can start to develop some of that instability training in the form of a bench press. You can start to do isometric overhead carries. You can put the bar overhead and have the athlete walk laps back and forth while stabilizing that weight. I don't have as much room in my clinic to be able to do long laps, so I'll just have them throw that bar overhead and then march in place just to be able to like jostle the weights around a little bit to create that demand on the shoulders to have them work hard to stabilize an unstable weight. Then I also love, once they can start tolerating that, I also love doing strict presses and behind the neck presses in that wider grip that we're going to see with overhead squats and snatches. Um, Training the overhead squat with an unstable bar is wonderful as well, because that often teaches the athlete where their most optimal position underneath the bar is going to be when it's unstable. You can get away with some sloppy positions of inactive shoulders with a regular barbell, but when that bar or that weight is shaking all around, you're going to want to make sure you're in a good position. So not only is it really healthy for training all of those stability muscles, it's also really helpful for, as a motor control type of exercise, to learn where to keep the bar, where to keep your body underneath that bar. I really love it because to progress exercise, we usually load it up, right? We add weight onto the bar. Sometimes early in a process, though, uh, when tissues are still irritable, they can't tolerate increased loads. So I love that the bamboo bar makes it really challenging without needing to add a ton of weight. So you can really fatigue those muscles around the shoulder. The demand on that, all those rotator cuff muscles just goes up. We have increased rotator cuff activation with our earthquake bar or bamboo bar type of exercises without needing that increased load. So if you don't have one, I highly recommend investing in one. I think they're around $300. But you can also get a like thick PVC pipe from your local hardware store, and you can make a homemade one. I wouldn't use the thin little PVC pipes. That's what I used to use, the little PVC pipes you'd see people like warm up with in the CrossFit gym. But anything more than about 15 to 20 pounds on each side gets that PVC to really bend, and then that's a little risky, right? I wouldn't want that to snap overhead. So do the homework, go ahead and invest in one of the actual bamboo bars. You will thank me for it later. They're super fun to play around with and work. And anytime you can have your CrossFit athletes doing movements that are similar to the movements they want to do back in the gym, they're going to enjoy their rehab so much more. Okay, so that's number 3, anything hanging band technique, bamboo bar exercises. And then the last 2 exercises are more geared towards stability-based exercise for gymnastics, like hanging on the pull-up bar. So number 4 is scap pull-ups or scapular cars. We often find that athletes that are lacking stability run into some issues with that like traction force on the shoulder when they're hanging on a pull-up bar if their tissues aren't strong enough to handle that force. So as soon as they can tolerate hanging, I love the isometric active hang type of position to prep them to get back into their pull-ups and kipping pull-ups and so on. So a scap pull-up is a really nice place to start because that's going to really strengthen all the tissues that basically connect our arm to our bodies. So starting in full 180 degrees of flexion, all we're working on is scapular depression and then elevation back into that relaxed position. Depression and elevation. We're not coming in and out of end range flexion. We're staying there and going perfectly vertical. Ears should stay right in between the biceps throughout. And you'll often see that if this is challenging for some athletes, they're shaken just to be able to control that motion. The next thing I'll progress them to is a controlled articular rotation or car movement that you've heard. So instead of just going straight up and down, we're doing scapular depression, retraction, elevation, protraction. So we're trying to make big circles or like a big box with the scapula in that hanging position, and that mimics some of that motion that you'll see from your kipping pull-up. So what that does is improve some of that shock absorption that an athlete will be doing when they're going up, chin over the bar, and then back down or into that butterfly position. So if we can improve some of that ability to absorb that force, that's going to give them more success down the road when they get back into their gymnastics. If we bottom out or really come down hard, we're loading some of the passive tissues in the shoulder in that stretched or traction position, and that's what can often irritate some of those tissues. So the better absorption we have at the bottom, the better you're going to be. And then last, I debated on what to choose for my last one, but I ended up choosing some type of lat isolation work. So the lats, the barbell physio, Zach Long, he's always said the lats are the glutes for the upper extremity. We all know as physical therapists, if somebody has hip, knee, ankle pain, we often end up really targeting our glute muscles because they're really powerful and helpful to offload, load down the rest of the chain. So for the upper extremity, it's your lats. So you're going to do a lot of good for your athletes if you help them increase their actual lat strength, because that's not only going to protect their shoulders, because that's going to improve some of their shock absorption when they're doing those dynamic kipping motions, but you're going to improve their performance on the pull-up bar as well. That's huge for athletes. So any type of lat isolation work, one of the easier go-to ones is like a straight arm banded lat pull down. So we're taking the elbow joint out of the equation and just driving that arm down to our body. That's going to isolate your lats. I love doing a straight arm pull down in the form of a hollow hold. And nobody ever complained about a stronger midline, right? So just getting more time in that hollow hold position is wonderful. I also like a nice like banded kettlebell lat row where we're trying not to pull with the bicep. We are pushing down and engaging our lat and biasing the lat more. So anytime you can isolate the lats is time well spent, especially for a temporary amount of time where the athlete is not being able to hop up onto the pull-up bar and do their thing. But that will increase how effective their kip is. Somebody's commenting here, the lats are the foundation of a strong kip. You're absolutely right. Thanks for that comment. Especially in that full flexion end range position, we need strong lats, and a lot of athletes are struggling to achieve that lat strength in 180 degrees of flexion. The last one I was thinking of too is a rack chin up. So you can think about putting a barbell in the rack, and then you just need a box or a bench to prop your feet up in front of you. So your hips are going to be flexed. So you're kind of hanging with your feet propped up in front of you, and being in hip flexion while doing a pull-up prevents you from being able to arch your way up. So that's another way to really engage your lat muscles during that pulling movement. You can even increase the difficulty by widening your grip. Going slightly wider than your typical strict pull-up grip also really challenges the lats. So that kind of creates like a nice flow of from easier to more demanding on those lat tissues. For that last category of lat isolation work for our shoulder stability client, for anybody needing shoulder stability. So those are my 5. They're kind of 5 categories. So that gives you plenty of options to pick and choose from kettlebell stability work to bamboo bar work to lat isolation work, to be able to prescribe for your clients at the right time in their rehab phase. If you think I missed something, please comment underneath, tag me, let me know. I'm super curious to see what's given you success in your practice. But I hope that provides you with some new ideas. Keep getting stronger. Like I always, well, I don't always say it, but if you don't look like an upside down triangle, you got to keep working on your lat strength. So that's my recommendation. And that completely comes from just pure meathead science, which I love. But I hope that provide some new ideas. And that's it for the podcast this week. We'll be back on Monday with more PT on Ice Daily Show. Have an awesome weekend.